sort of petered out over the course of a number of years, but I eventually left completely a year ago because I'd got sick, and mainstream media, or my very frenetic engagement in it, is what got me sick, or at least was a big cause of it. I got thyroid disease. This then forced me to explore my own wellness, and I had to delve into it quite deeply. And I might just ask, who in the room, don't feel you have to put your hand up, but who in the room has got some sort of autoimmune disease? All right, I'm looking at about a third of the room, I think. So thyroid disease is a form of autoimmune disease. As you probably know, nobody's got answers for autoimmune disease. You've got to go and work it out for yourself. And that's what I did. It forced me to explore my own wellness, which then enabled me to, of course, go and leave mainstream media, just as mainstream media itself was getting very, very sick. It was a perfect kind of circular irony. So today I'm going to talk about my wellness journey and the thyroid sort of fructose connection, and how I have shared the messages to the mainstream. And I think for everybody in this room, I hope that I've got something that I can share with you, because I know that many of you are personal trainers, bloggers, a lot of you do interact with the media, and there are certain things that I find very, very helpful when you're conveying these kind of woo-woo messages, and they are still unfortunately deemed woo-woo. As I say, this is my area of expertise. If I can write about bike lanes on a page that I share with Andrew Bolt, I think I can get a lot of things across the line. And as I say, I firmly believe that these are the kinds of messages that we need to be not preaching to the converted. We don't need to be talking to everybody in this room about this kind of stuff. We need to be preaching to the unconverted, the mainstream, you know, the kinds of people who read Cosmo and Andrew Bolt. I'll stop talking about Andrew Bolt. So I'm going to do this as just a series of quick questions. That's a photo that I don't bring out too often, but it's a photo of me when I first got very, very sick. So why did I quit sugar? Well, I've got David Gillespie in many ways to be very, very grateful for. It started off as an experiment. I wrote a weekly column in Sunday Life magazine, and every week I had to come up with something else to do. I was the human guinea pig, and I had to find something to do, and I thought, well, you know, I'll quit sugar, you know. I'd read about David, and I'd read his book Sweet Poison, and I thought, oh, I'll give this a crack, you know. This will entertain people for a week. And I really didn't want to do it. I gave it a crack, and there's nothing like a deadline and, you know, however many people read Sunday magazine, or Sunday Life, I should say, to make sure that I actually did it. And I did it, and I sort of did it for 2 weeks, and I kept going and going as per David's instructions. And yeah, so that's what started it. However, I'd also had a very big nagging feeling I should do it for quite some time. I have Hashimoto's disease, and it's a disease, for those of you who don't know, that attacks, an autoimmune disease that attacks the thyroid gland. The thyroid pretty much controls everything that makes us feel human. Every cell has receptors for the thyroid hormone. So it really does modulate everything about you. And I'm going to just confess right now that my thyroid's playing up today. So I'm a bit wobbly, and I prefer to put these things up front. And this is also a big part of my message and a big part of my messaging, which I'll get to in a moment. So yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, I was working at Cosmopolitan. Nobody in a room full of women, 16 staff, had their period at the right cycle to do the egg timer test. It's a hormone test which some of you might know about. It was very new at the time. And because I must have sat somewhere in the right end of the cycle, so I had to go off and do this test. And the blood test came back a couple of weeks later and basically told me I was going through premature menopause and that I was infertile. I was 33 at the time, and I chose to ignore that piece of information for 6 months. I pretended it didn't exist, so I had a magazine to put out. I, in that time, did 2 24-hour mountain bike races. I climbed Machu Picchu. I did the soft sand race in Bondi. I did the City to Surf. I ran to work every day. I progressively lost more and more weight. And, you know, my period stopped. A whole range of, you know, my hair started to fall out, my nails started to fall off. Eventually, after 6 months, I fronted up to an endocrinologist, and he basically said to me it was the worst case he'd ever seen, that I was 2 weeks from heart failure. I got a whole heap of blood tests back. I had pre-diabetes issues, I had cholesterol issues, you know, and I was somebody who prided myself on being fit and healthy. So a whole host of, I guess, consequences stemmed from that. I had insomnia, chronic insomnia, really bad depression. I couldn't work for a year, so I basically hid out for a year after being very visible. And that was probably at the beginning of all of that. So I was just not well. This was the slide that said, if you could find a picture of somebody pushing something, you know, like you're pushing too hard, well, this is what we get. But you get the gist. I was pushing myself really, really hard. And the endocrinologist, or being pushed by a handsome man in trunks. That wasn't happening, I assure you. Yeah, so basically the endocrinologist at the time said that I was a Ferrari with a, chassis that was still kind of okay, but I was going at, 350 kilometres an hour in first gear, and I was a collection of metal rubbing on metal. That was his helpful description. And he sent me some thyroxine, and off I went, and I hope there's no endocrinologists in the room, or at least the endocrinologists I used to see. But that was the extent of his help at the time. So as I say, I didn't work, but I did gradually get better, and I explored a whole heap of wellness topics, ferociously. But it wasn't until I experimented with sugar and met up with David Gillespie here in Sydney one day for a cup of chai that things started to fall into place. I started to get some traction on my health. And at this point, I'll just pause. We got ticks in there were instructions for ticks. I heard David use this wording as well. It's an experiment. It can only ever be an experiment. And then the other thing is that I've learned is there is no fix. This really annoyed me when I first worked this out, but now I find it the most liberating thing that's I've come across in my journey. Okay, so what's the thyroid sugar connection? Okay, that there is a ball of wool. So I an impressionist's version of a ball of wool. Look, it's a very sticky connection between thyroid and sugar. When I talk about thyroid, and excuse my language, I refer to it as just a clusterfuck, It's a clusterfuck of diagnoses, treatments, causes, reasons, theories, symptoms. Who's got thyroid problems in the room? Of the people, yeah, right, okay. Yeah, lots of you. You know what I mean. I mean, one day this is, popping out. The next day this is happening. You just wake up and you go, well, what are you going to deal with me today? And it's very much, it's like having that ball of wool with lots of other threads and your Christmas lights kind of embedded in it, and it's an absolute mess. For me, having come from a journalistic background, I think for everybody, it's a human condition. We want to be able to pull on one thread and hopefully it'll all come out and unravel and we'll get to the bottom of what it's all about. It doesn't work that way, and that's something I had to learn. One thread, though, that I have tended to pull on is the idea of leaky gut. Basically, leaky gut obviously allows gluten to pass into our systems, and then our antibodies come and attack the gluten. It's a little bit like a splinter. We get a splinter, our antibodies come and attack it. It gets swelling, it gets inflamed, and eventually that allows the splinter to release. With gluten in the gut, the antibodies enter. I'm really, really simplifying this, but the problem is that gluten has a very similar molecular structure as the thyroid gland. So our antibodies get confused and then go and attack the thyroid while they're there. Hey, we're attacking the gluten, let's go through the thyroid while we're at it. So gluten has to go out of anybody's diet with Hashimoto's, or I would say with autoimmune disease. Absolutely, it's not up for discussion. But what causes leaky gut? Adrenal stress, toxic metals, estrogen surges, pathogens, viruses. But what causes the adrenal stress? The answer I often get is, low thyroid function. And so around and around in circles you go. Another thread that you can sort of pull out of all of this, out of the impressionist ball of wool there, is sugar, of course. Basically, like metabolic syndrome, and David's touched on it, and I'm sure many of the speakers today will be touching on metabolic syndrome, thyroid or Hashimoto's is increasing sort of at the same sort of exponential rate as our sugar consumption. And there's all different kind of statistics. It's about between 1 and 11% of people have an autoimmune disease relating to the thyroid. Some people say it's as much as 35% of the population, and it is growing. Everybody agrees that it is growing.